Howdy, I'm Kahnda, and this is my 100th video. I didn't put that in the title, but I wanted to mention it here. For my 100th video, I decided to go back to Minecraft. Back to my roots, which I've used too often for title ideas. I'm not sure if I've talked about this before, which is partly because it's a very improbable goal, but I'd love to someday be part of the Hermitcraft server, and with that goal in mind, I wanted to start this new series that I'm calling Building with Kahnda. Now, I'm not sold on this title, but I haven't come up with anything better quite yet. For this series, I'll be working on a new build project for each video. This video's build project is a copper fence around a future village, so let's hop on into it and I can tell you more. The footage I have from this build project all comes from the flashback mod. I'm learning how to make some fun clips and time lapses from it, so hopefully you enjoy. This land used to be a birch forest that I took the time to completely chop down and terraform, and now I'm building up this copper fence around it to set up the boundaries for a village I'm going to be building throughout this series. When I was coming up with the plans for this village, I'd been watching a lot of Gemini Tay, and this season on Hermitcraft, she's doing this Gothic medieval style, I think, so there's a lot of influence from that style for me. I'm trying to do a gradient with the pillars that I'll be putting throughout the copper parts of this fence, which I haven't done before. The bottom had been done in coal blocks, but then I realized that it was going to take insane amounts of coal that I didn't have yet, with her farm coming later, so I had to tear down what I had done so far to switch it to something else. Also, as a note, there are likely to be some hallucinations of sorts throughout the video. There's some iffy stuff with the mods I have interacting with each other, I think, so you may see some tops of pillars or even a couple of houses appearing for moments and then disappearing. Promise me that you'll pretend they aren't there, okay? Thanks. With the actual copper sections of this fence, I'm letting them oxidize. The color palette for it is supposed to be a gradient from black to white, so I think the green blocks will look pretty nice. I'm considering including some not totally oxidized parts and even some iron bars too for some texture, but I'll have to play around with that after it all oxidizes. It takes so long for things to oxidize, by the way. I've managed to make it through a lot more of this project, and the majority of it is still orange. So we'll probably have a good chunk of a village built before we have the green portions ready to play around with, but hey, that just means more to work on in the future. I severely underestimated how many blocks I would need to make it all the way around the perimeter also. I think it ended up taking 2 inventories worth to make it all the way around. I know it takes at least 1 inventory's worth. Lots of gathering of materials, going to work building stuff, and then realizing that I needed more, then going back to gathering more materials, rinse and repeat. But it's so worth it to see how it looks at the end, especially when I'm flying in from my other base. I've been playing in this world for over a year, by the way. It's a realm with friends, probably worth mentioning. This is the same world that I was in when I streamed for Thankmas in 2024. It's like at the end of the stream, you can see that. Now, when I got to removing the coal blocks from this section, I had some unwanted visitors spawn in. I wanted to finish what I was doing first before I took care of it, because they hadn't noticed me yet, you know? I had stuff I wanted to get done first. I'm pretty proud of how this clip turned out, taking out some pillagers and stuff. Excuse those hallucinations in the background. They don't exist, remember? But now that that is taken care of, it's time to get back to getting rid of the coal blocks. It might feel like this is lasting for a long time to get rid of these. Honestly, that's probably because it took a long time to get rid of these. Once I make it to the pillars that I put in, it won't be as long of a process, but there are just so many blocks to place and break around the perimeter. Building takes a long time, y'all. With the coal blocks finally gone, I've got to go back to one of my 2 favorite pastimes in the game, farming squid ink. If you saw my first building time-lapse that I did when I was building a flag in my last single-player world, you know that I spent a lot of time gathering this for black dye. We're back at it again. When I decided that the coal blocks being the base of the gradient would be too much work for a shorter period of time, I wanted to switch that base part to black concrete instead. It's a lot easier to farm up some black concrete, especially since I've basically demolished a desert, and it's got a bit of a darker tone to it, so it makes for a nice start of a gradient. Plus the underwater camera work is pretty cool. Gotta fly back to the village, which means a cool shot. Thumbnail material, am I right? Now, the thing with concrete is that it starts out as concrete powder. You've got to place it in a way where it touches water before it turns into the actual concrete blocks. And I've got a lot of concrete powder to turn into concrete blocks. I've seen people do some fun things where they make automated machines to turn their concrete powder into concrete blocks, but I also have this swamp right beside where I'm building this village, so it seems like a perfect place to do the job to me. Also, don't worry, I pick up all of the blocks that float away. Or most of them. I thought that I had enough concrete blocks to make it all the way around, so I went ahead and started placing the blocks. Here's the thing though. I didn't count how many I placed there a second ago when I was turning the powder into blocks, but it was definitely not enough, which means I only made it part of the way around before I had to go water some more concrete. So I decided that I would go place the rest of the concrete in this deeper section of the swamp beside the village. I think this little pond actually opens up into a really big underwater cave. I'm not positive though, because I haven't swam down there to explore it yet. I should possibly do that sometime. Would y'all want to see that in a video? This clip isn't very static for part of it. Sorry about that. I was hoping that the sweeping shots would be cool, but then I sped it up and it kind of takes away from some of that coolness. Some more underwater shots are fun though, so hopefully that makes up for it. Once again, we are back to placing concrete around the base. I swear there's more to this build than just this though. Hang in there for just a little bit longer. Would it keep you interested if I start to tell you some of the idea for what I want to build in this village? I've already got a little bit of an idea for wanting to put some moving parts within the buildings and maybe some in the sky and street too. I've put down a copper golem that you might see in the background that's putting an item in a chest and then the item moves through hoppers back to its copper chest. I think as far as the buildings themselves, I've got a plan for things like a mine, a bakery, some houses, and more. I was thinking I might use the different buildings as a spread out storage solution. They'll all look nice, but I can split up the different blocks into the building that they're related to, like having all of my building blocks in the mine or all of the food stuff in the bakery. Do y'all have any requests for a building to put in? I've still got some time before I get to work on them, so there's still a chance to get your input in. This village is bordered by a swamp on most sides, and then there's one of those dark forests? Woodland forests? What are they called? The ones that are completely covered. That's on one side of the village. I'm thinking it would be fun to make some lore about these sections and maybe even do some small builds that tie into that lore too. We'll have to see what comes of that. A piece of me wishes that this village was in a pale oak forest because the gray sky would really add to the ambiance, but I'll have to figure out a way to work with what I've got here. I've thought about putting birds in the sky somehow, but I could also somehow work in some particle effects. I haven't done that before, but that would be fun. I think candles would also work well to fit with the ambience of the place. I've seen people do some floating candles before, so that may be pretty neat. I've mostly just been planning to use the white candles, but I think some gray or black candles would look nice too. What do y'all think? Also, there are so many sheep that have been hanging out in this area. Frogs too. The frogs are the copper-looking frogs also, so they fit right in. I'll have to figure out a way to incorporate them into the whole thing. But the whole base is finally done, guys. Time to get a little clip of it from the top so you can see the whole effect. Since I switched up what the base would be, I had to rework what I wanted the gradient to look like. I knew that these were the blocks that I wanted to use for it, including this wall on the top of it to give it that spike look. When I looked at it from far away though, it didn't quite feel right. I decided to try switching the stone and andesite to see if it fit better that way, and it did in my opinion. Let's see what you think. I'm pretty happy with this gradient now. I think it looks nice. But I've got to check it from all angles, just to be sure. I finally get to start working on the actual pillars in the fence now. Are y'all so excited for it? I didn't have a lot of plan going into it about where I wanted to place these. I was thinking they needed some space between them, but I didn't want it to be too much space. There needs to be a nice balance so it doesn't look overcrowded, you know? I think in some portions of the fence, it is possibly a little overcrowded. However, I was thinking there might be a way to tie this in with the story. The places where the pillars are really close to each other are near this spot where I plan to build this big mansion. It also happens to be around the area with the covered forest, where more mobs will be tending to spawn at night. It could be that these pillars are meant as a sort of defense system somehow, so there needs to be more of them in these areas. For the swamp, a lot of it opens up either right by water or so close to water that it's almost right by it. So there's not as much necessity to have the built-up pillars in these areas. I don't want to make it so that the covered forest is actually unsafe though. I was hoping at some point to bring some villagers over here to live, and I don't want them to be in any actual danger. Maybe I could light it up in there, or only use things like glow lichen so it's a very faint light, or make it spawn-proof somehow? I'll have to think about that one. I think this is the first time I'm focusing a lot on the aesthetic of a build. When it came to the compound in my single-player world, the aesthetic was basically whatever gets the job done. Very little decoration in that area. But I want to lean more into the decorative aspect of this build. Oh, and interiors? We'll have to see what gets done with the interiors. That is extremely not my strong suit in this game. But I'm gonna learn how to make some cool ones. When it came to this base on the highest section of the land, I realized I needed to change it a little bit. There isn't as much space on the fence to work with for the gradient, so I decided it would be best to tear this part down and use the coal blocks as the base, only for this highest section. I personally don't think it takes away from the gradient all that much, but let me know what you think. Getting to the end of deciding where all of the pillars are gonna go, I have to start thinking about the next part of the build. My favorite thing to do in Minecraft, apparently. Gathering blackstone. I don't know how this is, but all roads lead back to it. I always end up in these netherite tunnels, and I'm basically never looking for netherite. When it came to the compound, the entirety of the tunnels underneath the build were made of the blackstone bricks, so that meant a lot of the block needed to be gathered. And for a personal build I'm working on with a friend on this realm, we need several double chests full of blackstone for it. Will y'all ever see that build? We shall see. It's gotten to the point where I have to travel really far in the netherite tunnels to find any more blackstone. I may have to start some new ones just for blackstone instead. Once you find a nice pocket of it, it's really easy to mine a whole lot of it at a time. Especially if you find one of those pockets inside of the basalt delta biome. Is that what the biome is called? I think it is. I did a lot of mining in those areas while watching Blue Eye Samurai back last winter. That was a good time. And that was probably my favorite transition in this video. It was totally by accident, but when I saw it while putting all of the clips together, I got really excited. This just made me think of something. I mentioned how I was watching Blue Eye Samurai when I was mining out blackstone and basalt last winter. Now, every time that I go to mine out blackstone, I think of that time, and I remember how enjoyable that was. A lot of times when I was watching certain videos or going through certain things in life, I get the memories of those things when I go back and walk through the part of the Minecraft world that I was working on during those times. Is that just a me thing? Like, when I was mining out ancient debris to get my very first set of netherite armor, I was watching through the Technoblade stream VODs from when he was playing on the Dream SMP. Now, anytime that I go to mine more ancient debris, I think about those videos, and sometimes I decide to pull them up and watch them again. That's also partially how I know how much time I spent on that old single-player world, since I lost that data. That world went through a lot of different iterations, and every time it got switched from one hard drive to another, it reset the time statistic, so I had to make some guesses. I have some memories from this other realm I was in a while ago too. I'm no longer in that realm, but I was playing in creative, and I was mining out this huge hole that went from the top of a mesa hill to Deep Slate underground. It was going to be, I think, a sort of Bowser's Castle style of build. The thing that I was watching during that time is basically the complete opposite of that vibe though. I was doing that when Season 3 of Bridgerton came out, and I remember watching through the first half that came out twice while working on that, and then I watched the second half basically as soon as it came out, also working on that. I never did finish that project. I hope I finish this one. The rest of the mining out of blackstone is basically the same though, so it's time to switch to something else. Working on this next part took a little bit of thinking for me. I'm really getting the gradient going as I add on the blackstone pieces, and the gradient itself I think was around 9 different blocks. But some of these sections of the fence were definitely more than 9 blocks tall, so I was trying to think through what would look like a pretty natural progression for the colors. Sometimes I'd have to put a few of the same blocks, or other times it was only one. For the really short segment on the side over by the swamp, every block was only used one time. With this being my first time really working on a gradient of any sort, I'm happy with how this turned out. But you won't see it quite yet, because we still have more to get into place. I just thought of a completely random thing. I intend on using the copper lanterns for this village because the green light is pretty cool, and I think it'll look nice with the oxidized copper on the fence. Should I figure out how to incorporate some of these lanterns into the fence? That isn't included in this video sadly because I literally just thought of it, but I think that might be a fun thing to include in future videos in this project. Maybe some overhanging lanterns at entrances into the village, and a few intermittently throughout the rest of it. I put something to light up the fence at the top, but that's spoilers for later in the video. But it doesn't light up very much of the fence, if it really lights up anything at all. So I think the lantern idea is gonna have to be tested out, for sure. I did this gradient for both the blackstone and some deep slate tile, but for the rest of it, I think I want to try out a nice little time-lapse with some music behind it, without any voiceover with it. Let's go ahead and get that going, shall we? So, that's the entire fence. All done! Here are some shots of what it looks like, kind of flying around a bit to see it from some different angles. I will say this isn't quite what it will end up looking like, since it'll change quite a bit as the rest of it fully turns green. Hopefully in one of the next few videos in this series you'll get to see it in its full effect, you know? I'm hoping it'll look the way I'm wanting it to. And you probably noticed in that time-lapse segment that I got myself a happy gas to use for the building of the higher sections. I didn't expect that it would be so nice, which is probably silly because I think a large part of the use for that mob is to be for building. I'm excited to use the little guy in other builds. I'm hoping to make some other tall buildings here at some point. We shall see. I also will need a name for my new little buddy. This is also just about the end of the video. My 100th video! I've learned some things when it comes to making a video of this style. When I recorded this, I only got the flashback recordings and I didn't record any mic audio or anything, so this entire thing has been voiceover. I think in the future I'll be attempting to mix that up some, although I've recorded some of the next one and I haven't made that change quite yet. I also learned that when you export a recording from Flashback, it doesn't include the Minecraft audio. I've maybe got some ideas for how to deal with that in the future, but I'll have to actually test it out and see how it goes. I'd love feedback from y'all also. This was my first real try making a video of this style, and if you have any suggestions for what I can do in future videos to improve, please let me know. As we pull up above the land where this village will be, you can really see what the gradient looks like. I'm so happy with how it turned out. I hope y'all enjoyed watching this build process. I shall see y'all next time. Bye!